Hey, what's up, fellas? This is Dan Gasper, also known as Mr. Tuttle 05 across the DFS industry. And I'm here with the RotoGrinders pregame show here, taking a look at what limited action we had last night with just the one game slate, and then kind of trying to fast forward and take a little bit of a preview look at tonight's massive 12-game slate. Don't get me on a rant about the NBA and their scheduling. They could have definitely done a better job at scheduling these games and making it a little bit more even across the nights. 12-game slates can get a little bit overwhelming, so hopefully we'll be able to knock out some questions. If you have any questions, go over to our YouTube chat or just our chat on rotogrinders.com as well. While you're on YouTube, make sure to hit like, subscribe, do all that good jazz. I'm not sure if we're giving anything away for free today, but never hurts to hit like. There's a chance that we'll throw something your way. But anyways, like I said, looking at last night's action, it was just a one-game slate. And I'll actually take some questions, even if anybody has just questions on last night's slate in general or strategy with showdown slates, because honestly, I think the strategy is a little bit more interesting than just kind of looking over basically what happened in last night's slate between Dallas and Los Angeles. But we'll take a look at it. Scroll down again. This is the results database page. So go to rotogrinders.com. Click on that NBA tab, and then you'll see results DB in the drop-down menu. Click on that. That will bring you to here. You have the capability to navigate through past slates. I don't know how far back we go. We go a ways back, though, but I've navigated us to last night's slate. And so we're just taking a look here at last night. You can see what the optimal lineup construction was with Luke in the captain slot, Kawhi, Kristaps, Zubac, Landry Shamet, and then Boban actually got some run as well last night due to the Dwight Powell injury. So nothing too crazy here. I will note I guess the places where this lineup kind of differentiated a little bit. They took a gamble on Kristaps. This was Porzingis' last game or first game back from an extended injury, so playing time was a little bit in question. He was still able to put up enough points for what he needed to do at his price range to be in the optimal lineup. And then Boban was the guy that really basically was the key to the optimal lineup. He's a guy that's not in the rotation regularly, so he benefited, of course, from that Dwight Powell injury last night. It's tough to justify playing too many Boban lineups last night, but when he does play, he obviously smashes. A very, very high point per dollar guy. So he was kind of the way or the path to creating the optimal lineup last night, but it wasn't all that realistic to playing him. I did think last night, kind of the interesting thing, and really the interesting thing with all showdown slates is there seems to be one clear path to lineup construction. And I can't help but think this is going to give you, I don't know if I would call it an advantage, but there's a pretty obvious way to differentiate your lineups both in cash games and tournaments if you're looking to do so on showdown slates. So last night, basically, if you were using the RotoGrinders optimal lineup tool or the optimizer, if you're using basically any other site's optimizer as well, you're going to end up on, again, very, very similar lineup construction. And we'll see if I can find the lineup last night that was kind of the most popular lineup. And I just kind of want to look at the main slate or the main GPP last night. If I can find it here, I just canceled out of the big one, the $100,000 up top. But either way, the kind of lineup construction that you were having last night was you're playing both Kawhi and Luka. You're captaining one of the two, and then you're going cheap throughout your lineup. And so that was my initial build. That was my initial lineup construction when I played last night as well. But I found and I thought that there would be some benefit basically to fading that lineup construction. One of the low guys or the low value guys that was really popping last night, and we'll see how high owned he was in the 100K to first GPP last night. One of the low guys that was really popping was Jalen Brunson. And basically in my lineup constructions, it was a case of if I wanted to play Kawhi, if I wanted to play Luka in the same lineup, if I wanted to captain one of the two, is basically, hey, I'm probably going to have to play Jalen Brunson. And as you can see there with that ownership percentage, 30% of the people thought that was, kind of a fine lineup construction. I, on the other hand, decided, hey, let's get a little crazy here. Let's fade one of these guys. Let's fade one of Kawhi. Let's fade one of Luka. Looking back, I honestly think with 100K up top, if you're looking for unique lineup construction in a tournament like this on Showdown Slate, I actually kind of thought it was a good idea looking back at these ownership percentages. You see Kawhi was 91% owned. Luka was 90% owned. So what I did in my main lineup here was I faded Kawhi, and I went ahead and captained. Basically, what it allowed me to do, I went ahead and captained Lou Williams, and then I got up from Jalen Brunson to Patrick Beverley. Patrick Beverley obviously didn't work out just because he got injured. He did have 20 points, I believe, at the half. So it was a pretty good first half performance for him, but kind of failed out that way. But in that lineup, basically, because I was fading Kawhi, I wanted to fill that lineup with guys that I would think would take over his production on the court. So that's kind of something to take into consideration when you're fading somebody that's going to be extremely high owned. Sure, you can just fade them, but on single game slates, the leverage you get from fading him becomes even more important. So you're going to want to find leverage, create the leverage off of Kawhi with other guys that are going to fill in the stat sheet if Kawhi does not produce, if Kawhi gets into foul trouble, if he gets injured, something like that. And so the guys that I thought would be a couple of the immediate beneficiaries from that would be obviously Lou Williams and then Patrick Beverley as well. So obviously didn't break my way last night, but looking back again at the ownership percentages, when you're seeing guys that are 90% owned, I think with these top heavy tournaments, it completely makes sense to fade one of the two. And that's what I did last night. Again, didn't pay out for me, but I'm completely fine retrospectively looking back at it. Injuries didn't break my way, but again, was okay with kind of the process there behind it. I was, again, not extremely comfortable with Jalen Brunson, which a lot of people ended up being. He was kind of the highest owned value option under that 3K range. Landry Shamet was the highest owned at 3K. But I was fine with that. Trying to think if there's anything else I want to go over from last night or if we should just skip ahead. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to ask me. I'm on the YouTube chat right now. Feel free to log in, head on over there, ask me any questions. Quick question here from Michael. Do you think the injury to Powell cemented a stud as a captain early because that was one less hurdle the stud owners had to overcome, or was that premature to think? No, I think definitely that helped kind of cement the multiple stud lineup approach, because as we saw in the optimal lineup as well, it opened up Marjanovic. And even if Boban wasn't the guy getting the direct result from that run, a guy like Jalen Brunson may see a couple extra minutes. Again, basically as soon as that injury happened, and as soon as not as soon as that injury happened, but as soon as I saw Jalen Brunson I think he put up 10, 11 DraftKings points in his first rotation, I knew I was pretty much dead with fading Kawhi, even though Kawhi was throwing up bricks early. He was throwing up bricks left and right, but he was still getting rebounds, assists, steals. I think he ended up with a ton of steals and blocks, which kind of helped buoy his fantasy totals. But yeah, I mean, the injury changes everything. The injury with Powell, again, Boban was in the captain or in the optimal lineup construction, but then it also filters minutes around to other players that are going to benefit as well. So yeah, I think with that injury it was definitely kind of the preferred approach. And then especially then because the later injury, then again, Patrick Beverley didn't play at all in the second half. Again, I thought was a pretty solid pivot off of the Kawhi lineups, just because I did think the usage would go elsewhere. And so Beverley injury really sealed the deal on my specific lineup, but it also kind of helped seal the deal on basically anyone that did the fade Kawhi to pay up for more expensive Clippers options lineup as well. I got a comment here from Blender. He faded Brunson, so I don't feel as bad. Again, to recap on the Jalen Brunson, I think he was an interesting point to me. He really was an interesting point. I thought a lot about it last night as I was constructing lineups. Brunson was a guy, I believe if you looked across the industry, he was getting about a 14-point minutes projection, or a 14-minute projection, I should say. But his minutes seemed a lot less stable than that, in my opinion. He was a guy that I wouldn't have been surprised if nobody got hurt, if people got their normal run. He was a guy that I wouldn't have been surprised, especially with Kristaps back in the rotation as well, if he would have got squeezed down to, single-digit minutes. I really thought single-digit fantasy points was well within his range of outcomes as well. And so fading Brunson I thought was a really reasonable move because, again, I thought he would be the highest owned cheap option, which he was. And basically I wasn't completely comfortable with the minutes projection he was getting. He got there, obviously. So, yeah, didn't work out for me. I didn't have any Boban either. He's a guy that, again, love him completely, but he's a guy that his rotation is completely unpredictable, especially with another big man back in the rotation. So it sounds like Blender kind of had the same experience as me last night. Stone here. When Beverly went out yesterday, who was the biggest beneficiary? I'm assuming Beverly is out for tonight as well. Yeah, then that's really a good segue question into tonight's slate. Because that Clipper value is going to basically shape everything. I think it is safe to assume Patrick Beverly is going to be out. I don't know if we have him added here on the – yeah, we have him here on the Situation Room. Again, this is something you can go see. It's a premium product here at RotoGrinders.com. Just go to the NBA tab, and if you clicked on Injury Report, it will take you to the Situation Room here. You can see we already have Patrick Beverly listed doubtful to play tonight. It was Lou Williams was the guy who grabbed the second half start. And we can go see that again if we go to another tool here at RotoGrinders, go to the Court IQ tool here. Click on last night's game. You can kind of see who they started in the second half with Patrick Beverly sidelined. Lou Williams here started the second half. They remained with their other similar starters to last night. But Lou got the second half nod. He played 8 minutes. And then he subbed back in with about a minute left in the third quarter and it pretty much played the remainder of the game. So that's a massive rotation for him. Massive second half minutes for him. So he basically saw 20 second half minutes here, which is something he honestly may be looking at. It's tough to predict him for 20-minute halves, but if we take a look at what we have for his minute projection here, just to start the day, we have him at 33. So honestly, that's something, if he grabs a start, you could see fairly decent upside to those minutes. And he's already rating as a very positive value on the slate. He will probably be one of the highest owned players on the slate. So it's not like he's sneaking past anybody here. He's extremely cheap on FanDuel as well. I believe he's only 6,300 on the FanDuel. But Lou Williams, to answer the question, is kind of the main beneficiary in terms of minutes. The other thing, though, that we have tonight with Clippers, Paul George is doubtful, Kawhi Leonard's or Patrick Beverly is doubtful, I should say, and Kawhi Leonard has yet to play a back-to-back this season. So we could be really looking at a thinned-out rotation here for the Clippers on the second half of back-to-back, which again would make guys like Lou Williams especially pop in a situation like this. So let's actually run that query real quick in Court IQ just to see. Yeah, and you can see it here. Los Angeles' usage ran 48 seconds ago. Los Angeles' usage with George, Leonard, and Beverly off the court this season. Again, this is a Court IQ tool at RotoGrinders. I actually don't think you have to be a premium member for this one. I think you have access to this regardless. So even if you're kind of looking just for additional information and free information, this is something you can access without a premium membership here at RotoGrinders. But anyways, yeah, look at some of these usage rates with the situation this season. George off the court, Leonard off the court, Beverly off the court. Let's make sure this is for this season. Yep. So Lou Williams' usage rate jumps to 35%. If you take a look here at the increase in usage, that's a 7% increase, which is obviously massive. If you look at his per 36 minutes here, you just look at the differential in points that he gets. He averages 10 more fantasy points per 36 minutes. This is for FanDuel specifically. If we click the Draftkings tab, that goes up even more because you do get that 3-point bonus, which is obviously nice. 12.65 fantasy points increase per 36 minutes on DraftKings. If you drop it down to a per minute basis, he's averaging 0.35 more points per minute with Kawhi, with George, and with Beverly off the court this season. So he's the guy that is going to be obviously the main beneficiary tonight. Again, it'll be interesting once we see ownership projections. It's a little early in the day for ownership projections, but once we see those ownership projections pop, he'll probably be one of the more owned players on the slate. So that's something to keep in mind. I think he's a really, really good play. He's going to be a tough overall fade on FanDuel. Again, I wanted to mention he's 6,300 on FanDuel, which is insane. Montrezl Harrell, 5,900. FanDuel has very suppressed pricing lately, and so that's kind of why these guys are extremely, extremely cheap. But yeah, they're going to be extremely high owned on FanDuel as well. And so I guess that kind of brings into the question then, is there a way to pivot off of this chalk? How much exposure to, Lou Williams, Montrezl Harrell do you want? Things of that nature, I guess, in tournaments. And it is an interesting question. This is a 12-game slate. So if you think about that, it's a 12-game slate, and we very may well have a guy or guys that are 50+% owned, which is kind of crazy to think about. That might be a little bit extreme. We'll need to see what Jamino spits out here with his run, and that's something to monitor throughout the day, is how projected ownership changes. But a Lou Williams, who is obviously an awesome play in this spot, but if he's going to be around 50% owned on a 12-game slate, that's kind of crazy. I'm not going to say he's a bad play, because he's obviously a good play. He could very well be in the optimal lineup, but you have to start looking for ways to get off that type of chalk if you're multi-entering in tournaments. Completely fine still grabbing exposure. Obviously, if you're running 150 lineups out there, I'm completely fine, grabbing similar exposure, about matching the field. But that is a guy that if you want to really take a stance on, you're going to differentiate your lineups immediately just by taking a stance on him, whether that be underweight, overweights, and whatnot. The other question that you could also ask yourself is, who is going to be the guy that is going to benefit from this injury situation and might not be really high owned? So we know Lou Williams is the immediate beneficiary. We know he's going to be extremely high owned still. We know Montrezl Harrell is going to be high owned. He's going to be a beneficiary as well. Shamet is cheap enough where I think he's going to see decent ownership as well. He's locked into minutes. But then we get into some of these secondary rotation guys that one of these guys is going to outperform the price tag for sure. It's just a matter of who's going to do it and if you can get a read on who's going to do it. And honestly, it's a little early in the day for me to have an exact read on who's going to do that. I would say that their center rotation is going to be very similar to what we've seen in the past. So that immediately makes me think, Zubac and then even Harrell is not going to neither of those guys are necessarily going to see a huge increase in minutes that we're going to see from a lot of these other secondary rotation guys. So those guys are guys that they're going to grab some usage increase. They're going to grab some increase on rebounds and the rebound rate, assist rate, that sort of thing. But they're not going to be guys that are going to see a huge minutes increase. So Zubac's not a guy that I'm going to be wanting to kind of go overweight on, just because I don't think his role is going to change all that much with the situation. So when we're trying to cycle through this, when we're trying to figure it out later in the day, guys that you would want to look to could be like a JaMychal Green. He plays a lot of the four. So with Kawhi and George out, there's guys that he's a guy that could pick up minutes. And you're basically really trying to find guys that you potentially think we're light on when projecting these minutes. So JaMychal Green could be a candidate. Let's say he's a candidate for even a little small minutes boost from what we have him at. We have him at 27 or 24 minutes. So even if we throw him up to 27 minutes, if you think he has range or that's in his range of outcomes, he's immediately jumping again as one of the stronger value plays on the slate. So it's guys like that we're going to want to look to. JaMychal Green, I would say, is probably at first glance one of my favorite options. The other options that we'll want to be kind of monitoring news-wise would be, who do we think is going to get a little bit more ball handling duties? Again, we think Lou Williams is going to start. Kind of assume that's going to be the case. But who's going to be that backup point guard that's getting those ball handling duties? Is that going to be Derek Walton, who we have for 22 minutes here? Is Jerome Robinson going to handle those backup duties? Is he going to have kind of upside on his minutes projection that we don't have baked in right now? So that's kind of news I can't really tell you about right now, because a lot of it will depend on kind of pregame reporting, lineups, the starting lineups that's announced, players announced who's going to be active, that sort of thing. But I will say initially here, kind of on first glance, JaMychal Green would be the guy that's currently projecting. He's projecting as an okay value, but he's the guy that's sticking out to me as somebody that, has upside on that projection, both in terms of minutes as well as in production. We've seen him in the past also put up pretty decent numbers when given the minutes. So JaMychal Green would be the guy that I would be looking to, that I think is probably going to be one of the lower owned Clippers players that would have some upside on his current projection. And what I just want to look at what his price tag is on FanDuel. So he's 4,400. It looks on both sites. So he's kind of a guy to look into as well. And yeah, Blender in chat here is basically saying the same thing as me. He likes Jermichael, Rodney Magruder possibly as well. Yeah, he's a guy that could get run as well. I wouldn't be all that surprised if he grabbed a spot in the starting lineup. It'll be interesting to see what they run with Kawhi not out there, but he could actually grab a spot in the starting lineup as well. So be interesting to see breakdown tonight. There are also the other thing to realize is, yes, Los Angeles, the Clippers represent the best options, I think, at first glance in terms of injury situations to monitor, and really the best value on the slate, I think, is going to be a Clipper guy. But there are, again, it's a 12-game slate. There are a lot of situations to monitor that are going to go overlooked simply because the slate is so huge. So I don't think any of these situations are, again, going to be as influential as what we're seeing with the Clippers against Atlanta. But there are some spots that we'll want to look at that could provide some value as well. I guess one of those spots right off the bat here, going back to the injury room, Steven Adams is questionable. He left last game early, and I believe Nerlens Noel did not play in that game either, and he's listed as questionable as well. And so immediately there with Oklahoma City, we're looking at a potentially extremely thin front court with Oklahoma City. If both those guys miss, you're looking at – he's not a very attractive player, but someone like Mike Muscala would be getting heavy minutes. If I can type his name in right, I don't know why he's not showing up. We might not have a current minute projection for him or something. Or I have him excluded is also another possibility. Anyways, Mike Muscala would be the guy that would be seeing kind of an increase in heavy minutes if both those two guys are out. I think currently what's probably going on is we're projecting both those guys in. Yeah, that's the case. Steven Adams and Nerlens Noel are both kind of locked in for those center minutes is what we're currently projected. So we don't have a whole lot of Muscala minutes out there, but Muscala would be the immediate beneficiary. And just out of curiosity, so we can do this. We can add a player without a projection if we want to. Just curious what his price tag is. Yeah, he's 3,500 on DraftKings. So immediately jumps in as a guy that could be in line for really a massive workload and might go overlooked just because the Clippers' value is so insane on this slate. So yeah, let's go through some other injury situations as well for tonight, things to look into. If you have any questions, again, go over to the YouTube chat. This show is not going to last as long as it should if you guys aren't asking questions. So if asking any questions you want, it could be about tonight's slate, could be about last night's slate, anything you're interested in, I'll do my best to answer those. But yeah, going back to the other injury situations, the next injury situation, or the next team, I guess, we'll be wanting to monitor tonight is in Denver. We have a lot of Nuggets players already missing. Jamal Murray's one of them. Paul Millsap's one of them. Plumlee is one of them as well. So we're going to be looking at kind of a different lineup for the Nuggets as well tonight in different minutes. So let's go to Court IQ here. Interested in seeing what the rotation could look like tonight. And again, 21 seconds ago, you see somebody ran already. Denver's usage with Millsap, Plumlee, Harris, and Murray off the court this season. One thing I'll click on this, but then I'll also give a little tip here when we're talking about Court IQ. So I'll click on this real quick. So this query, the problem that we are really, if this is only a season-long query, which it is, we're really limiting the sample that we're getting if we're including all these guys off the court. You can see our biggest situation or biggest sample here that we're talking about is 146 minutes. So if we have a situation like this and you're looking at Court IQ and trying to get a better view of kind of what a player's usage will be like with guys off the court, the biggest thing to make sure we're doing is we're getting the highest usage guy off the court. So Jamal Murray is going to be the highest usage player. We want to make sure he's off the court. But let's say like somebody like Mason Plumlee, who does not have a high usage rate. He's going to affect rebounds and rebounds rate a little bit, but he's a very low usage player. Gary Harris might even be a better example because he's not going to affect rebounds. He's not going to affect the assist rates all that much. So Gary Harris might be a guy to not include in this query just to see if we run it, if we get a bigger sample. And we should get a bigger sample, obviously. So even if we're taking multiple people off the court, we get a slightly bigger sample in this instance. But essentially, when you're running these queries on Court IQ, what we're wanting to do is we're wanting to get the biggest sample possible without getting – we still want to try to get as accurate as possible, but we can take some of these low usage players off of the query just so we get a little bit bigger of a sample to work with. I'm always a little bit more in favor of – there we go. That's what we needed to do. If we take Plumlee out of the equation – who, again, Plumlee, if we look at him, is a pretty low usage player, 20% usage rate. It's actually not that terrible for a big guy. But rebound rate, et cetera, he's going to influence that more. But if we take those guys out of the equation, we're going to get a bigger sample to work with. So hopefully that's going to provide us with a little bit more accuracy on who really sees the biggest boosts with a guy like Jamal Murray off the court, who is the guy that we're probably most concerned about. Plumlee, in terms of Plumlee, we're more concerned about who's going to fill his minutes in the rotation than we are about how he affects really the play of the court. So again, funny, ironically enough, Gary Harris is the biggest beneficiary in this spot. Again, Gary Harris is not going to be playing tonight. And then Nikola Jokic is next in line. Will Barton's next in line. Those are guys that are fairly obvious as well. So Jokic, Barton, both are expensive. Both are guys that are going to benefit from this scenario. But again, it's like who's going to benefit the most in terms of secondary players that may go overlooked on this slate because we have so much value. Michael Porter Jr., as of recent, has been getting a lot of run, but he's also extremely expensive. He's a guy that's probably going to get more offensive responsibilities in a spot like this, but he's up to 6,600 on DraftKings, which makes him a little bit difficult to play, and he is up to 5,300, which is a little bit more accessible price point on FanDuel. He's a guy that I will say, just because he is the price that he is probably not going to garner a lot of ownership on a slate like tonight. So he's a guy that could go overlooked, and you might be able to get him at relatively a low ownership in a spot where he will get more run and he'll get more usage as well. One of the other guys here, if we let's look at our Denver projections specifically here. See if we can pick out some secondary players as well. Monte Morris is a guy, obviously, that would benefit from the spot as well. His price tag hasn't hiked up as much as some of the other guys just because he hasn't put on as strong of performances as some of these other guys like Michael Porter Jr. So his price tag is pretty accessible still. He'll probably garner a decent amount of ownership though. But some secondary guys that might benefit would be like Will Barton. Of obviously value just because there's not really many cheap guys. Just being a better point per dollar value. But if you're looking for Torrey Craig, as many questions as you can get, I'll do my best to answer. First question here from Jonathan Riggins, playing chalky players like Lou Williams who aren't cheap. On FanDuel specifically tonight, single entry, I'm okay with playing Lou Williams. He's going to be extreme chalk, but he's 6,300 on FanDuel, which is a crazy price point. Again, it's a 12-game slate. I'm more interested in taking a stance on Lou Williams in multi-entry tournaments than I am in single-entry tournaments. In single-entry tournaments, I think, especially on a 12-game slate, Lou Williams will be chalky. It should be easy enough to differentiate the rest of your lineup that you don't really have to worry about ownership too much on single-entry GPPs. But again, in multi-entry tournaments, I'm completely fine trying to take either a more aggressive stance on Lou or a less aggressive stance, kind of based on how you want to read that situation yourself. But in single entries, especially on especially on FanDuel, where you have to play two shooting guards, where Lou Williams is only 6,300, just play the guy. He can break the slate by himself. What game are you trying to get at the most since it's a big slate, and how many players from one team or one game is too much? Yeah, this is an interesting question. I don't think you necessarily have to game stack on a slate like this. The benefits of game stacking on a slate like this would obviously be if a game, if you get the triple overtime game or if you get the double overtime game, you're overexposed to that game. You're obviously going to experience immediate benefits from that as well. I think on a 12-game slate on this, if I was trying to focus on getting game stacks in, I would be looking at like a 2-1, 2-2 type of stack. I wouldn't be looking to completely full out stack a game just because the slate is so big. On smaller slates, it might make more sense to get a little bit more exposure to games than on a 12-game slate. So 12-game slate, I'm more focused on that kind of that 2-1 or 2-2 slate or 2-2 stack. If it's a situation though, like in Los Angeles or in Atlanta, I should say, with the Clippers, and if you're trying to play some of that Clippers chalk in game stacks, I would say Clippers, you could probably go up to 3 guys in your lineups and then run it back with maybe a Trae Young or a John Collins. A lot of it depends on how much salary you're allocating to a single team. In terms of the Clippers in a spot like this, there's enough low-priced guys that you can still realistically kind of beat the salary requirements. So it's not it would be different on a slate like this. I would not recommend. So let's take a step back. Let's say for some reason Paul George is here, Kawhi is here. Both these guys are in. Because of their price tags, I would not be interested in playing both those guys together, plus like a Trae Young on the other side, because you're simply allocating too much salary to a single game. And it's very unlikely that you're going to be able to pay off basically $30,000 in DraftKings salary with those guys to hit value. But on a slate like this, where both those guys are gone, Lou Williams is the most expensive guy at $7,300, and you can reasonably play like a Landry Shamet. And if you wanted to get like a JaMychal Green in there, you're looking at about $15,000 in salary for 3 guys, which is completely reasonable, and price tag that they can really blow out of the water still. So yeah, it's very dependent on the situation. So in kind of an injury riddled team in a good spot like the Clippers, I would be going with like a 3-1, 3-2 stack. But most games, it's going to be like a 2-1, 2-2 type of thing on a 12-game slate. Next question. How do we feel about pivoting to a point guard like Westbrook to differentiate from the Los Angeles Clippers chalk? I'm getting nearly none of him on my first run. Yeah, he's been playing a lot better as of late, too. His game logs are a little bit better. Houston's going up against Denver, not the greatest matchup in the world. I don't love Westbrook as like a point per dollar play, and I'm not completely worried about ownership on a slate like this. I wouldn't say he's a direct pivot off of that Clippers chalk either, just because of the price differences and the price discrepancy of the two options. So Westbrook in general is not somebody. I think he's an okay tournament option. He pretty much always is an okay tournament option. But probably somebody I'll be avoiding on this slate. I don't love him for his price tag. He certainly has the potential to go off for a 60-plus point game, but with Harden healthy, he's just not somebody that I'm all that interested in on this slate. But I'm not going to say you can't play him in tournaments. We have a healed Jalen Brown and Gallo are all too cheap. Yeah, one of the guy that jumps out to me in that statement is Buddy Hield. He's coming off a pretty good game. He's shown us upside in the past as well. Jalen Brown's one of those guys that we have to monitor from the injury standpoint. He is really cheap across the industry as well, but we have to monitor. I think he's questioned. We have him listed as a questionable tag here. So he's an injury to monitor. And then Gallinari was the other guy. Gallinari actually brings up a really good point. I was talking about some of the Oklahoma City Thunder rotation earlier. If Adams and if Noel are unable to go, Gallinari would be a guy that would pick up more front court minutes with that rotation as well. And he would be the guy that should see a pretty strong rebound rate increase as well. If the drop from Steven Adams and Nerlens Noel to a guy like Mike Muscala in terms of rebound rate is pretty drastic. So in a situation like that, you're not necessarily only looking for the guys that are going to replace Adams and Noel in the rotation, but also guys that can benefit in terms of rebound rate. And Gallinari would absolutely be one of those guys. So I actually like that Gallinari call. No Gary Harris. Yep. No, I know that. I was just kind of trying to prove a point with the court IQ that I'm in favor of getting a bigger sample when it comes to low usage guys. So I really want to run court IQ with the biggest sample possible. So if it's the difference between, a 600-minute sample and Gary Harris not necessarily taking him off the court versus a 100-minute sample with him off the court, I'm going to lean in favor of the 600-minute sample just because Gary Harris is such a low usage player. You see here he's a 21% usage, which isn't terrible. Ideally, we'd be talking about a guy like a Torrey Craig or something with a 13% usage that we could take out of the equation. But yeah, I'm trying to get as big a sample as possible. Is Trey going to put up a 70 burger again on DraftKings with no Beverly out? I mean, Trey's the obvious guy to bring back with that Clippers chalk. And so that's another thing to think about. I'm not too worried about it on 12-game slate, but if you're looking for a way to play Clippers chalk in a game stack that's going to be semi-unique, it would basically be not playing Trey, because Trey is going to be the immediately obvious stack. So it'd be playing like a John Collins would be the next guy with the highest upside. Really, honestly, I think those are the only two guys that I'm all that interested in playing on Atlanta. But even going Collins over Trey with your Los Angeles Clippers stack is a way to kind of differentiate your lineups a little bit. Because again, Trey is going to be the immediate option that people go to with the Clippers stack. So going down to Collins still has that upside. His price tag is reasonable on DraftKings as well. So Collins, I think you could make the argument that he's actually the better bring back option, not necessarily in terms of ceiling projection or anything like that, but just from a uniqueness standpoint, Collins will open up kind of a unique lineup construction. Do you ever play the 3-man challenges on FanDuel? If so, I'm going to go ahead and assume you're talking about 3-man, the 3-man lobby. So winner takes all 3-man. I actually love those games. I think those are games that you can play straight up. You can mostly lean towards a cash game lineup in 3-man lineups. I will say if there's an obvious spot where you can kind of differentiate. So I think if you're making a 3-man lineup, you can mainly go cash. But if there's a kind of a guy that you're playing just to play, just because he projects kind of well, but you don't love him all that much, I think you can take some liberties, I guess is what I'm trying to say, in those 3-man lobbies. You want to create some upside in your lineup, but you don't have to get too crazy with it in terms of ownership. So mostly cash lineup, but you're trying to build the lineup with a little bit of upside in it as well. So if you're playing, if your option is between two guys that have a similar projection, but one of those guys has clearly the higher upside, then you want to lean the guy with the higher upside in that. Let's see. Quick question. Paying up for Towns or buying low on either Harrell or Zubac. So I mentioned with Zubac earlier, I don't think his rotation minutes are going to change all that much in this spot. I think he's probably got about an upside of 25 minutes if he's playing well, which would then eat into Montrezl Harrell minutes. One rule I would make when creating multiple lineups tonight with Clippers is I would not allow Montrezl Harrell or Zubac in the same lineup. They're so negatively correlated that it's going to be extremely, extremely difficult for both of those guys to smash the value that you need to win GPPs. So that is one rule I would make, is to not go Harrell or Zubac in the same lineup. In terms of cash games, I think Harrell's the guy that you're going to at that position. Towns is still, let's see, I didn't look at the last rotation or last minutes from the Timberwolves. So I'll actually be interested here to see how many minutes Towns saw last game. I can obviously tell you what we have him projected with right now. We have him projected at 34 minutes. And let's see, last Minnesota game against Denver, how many minutes did he see? Yeah, he got up to 35 minutes pretty quick there. So it seems like he's playing, mostly normal minutes for him. He's a guy that I would be fairly surprised if he sees really any ownership at all on a slate like this. I think he's a guy that could make up for a strong tournament option in general. But in terms of cash games, or if you're doing those 3-man tournaments like 3-man games that we were talking about before, Harrell would be the option for me. But I do think Towns is an interesting tournament option as well. And he projects obviously fairly okay, provided the matchup. So Towns could make for an interesting tournament option. Quick question. Going forward, who is going to experience negative regression On the Pels, now that Zion is entering the rotation, Melly is the immediately guy that you already mentioned him. I would not expect Ingram's role to decrease in terms of minutes. Melly, it's going to be a lot of these secondary rotation guys, but we will also have to monitor tonight. Derek Favors is questionable, so we may not see the decrease in minutes that we're expecting from some of these guys like Nicolo Melli immediately tonight if Derek Favors is out. But in the future, yeah, Melly would be the guy immediately squeezed. Melly would be a guy that would be squeezed. Trying to look at their last game log as well to see if there's any guys getting secondary minutes. Yeah, I mean, Melly is basically the guy that I would expect to really be the most negatively correlated with Zion's minutes. Jackson Hayes would be another guy that could get squeezed out of the rotation a little bit, but that would be when Derek Favors is fully healthy. Ingram's decrease in production, or Ingram will unlikely see a decrease in minutes, but he could very well see a pretty big decrease in production. He'll have less minutes at the 4, which is good for rebounding. He'll have less usage as well. So Ingram in general, from like a production standpoint, is probably going to take a pretty decent hit, especially now that Drew Holiday's back. But in terms of rotation minutes, it would be a guy like Nicolo Melli as well as Jackson Hayes. Continuing to go through, and Dan mentioned here in the chat, go ahead, give this video a like, smash the like, smash the subscribe button here on YouTube. It does wonders for our YouTube rating, so go ahead and do that if you have a second. Let's see what else we have here. Trae Young is good chalk. I don't disagree with that, but again, I think in terms of if you want to play or kind of have a unique approach to your Clippers Atlanta Hawks game stacks, and I think he's actually a pretty good guy to pivot off of. Clipper stacks on a back-to-back. Yes, again, I think this is fine on a back-to-back just because we're not investing a lot of capital into these stacks. We're talking about guys that are, Lou Williams is 7K max. We're talking a lot of guys that are in the 3K range, Landry Shamet in the 3K range. We're talking about guys like JaMychal Green, who are only 4,400. Montrezl Harrell is only 5,900. So, yes, I understand it's a back-to-back, but I will take the minutes. I will take the matchup and their price tags. I'm completely fine in investing the amount of capital in these Clipper stacks on a back-to-back in this spot. It'd be a little bit different if we're talking about, higher priced guys, not as good of a matchup, that sort of thing. But considering the situation we have with so much usage to go around, with so many minutes to go around, with these guys priced as low as they are, it's a fine situation to invest in. Oh, okay. So Dan, the 3-man, he's not talking about a 3-man contest. He's talking about the 3-man challenge. So you're just taking 3 random players. Yeah, I personally haven't played that yet. I really like 5K Miles Turner on DraftKings against DeAndre Ayton. Thoughts? Miles Turner is actually a guy that has been a little bit better as of late. He obviously benefits, especially if Sabonis is off the court. Sabonis has been questionable as of late, but I think he's good to go here tonight. So it's unlikely we're going to get that benefit in terms of Miles Turner. But Turner as GPP option against Phoenix, completely okay with it. He's another guy that if he's playing well, he has minutes upside. So he's a guy that we're not going to be able to project for low 30s to mid 30s minutes, but he's a guy that will get those minutes if he's playing well. So yeah, I'm fine with him at his price tag as a tournament option. What are some of the main differences in your strategy when playing small slates versus large slates, like today's slate, specifically when max entering 150 lineups? So kind of just a general rule of thumb on large slates, you're not nearly as concerned about ownership. Kind of interestingly enough, because of the situation we have with the Clippers, we're going to see heavier owned players than we typically will on a 12-game slate. But in general, on a slate like this, I'm very, very much less concerned with ownership than I am on like a 3-game or a 2-game or a 4-game slate. So ownership's the biggest thing that you kind of pay attention to on smaller slates. And there's typically better leverage opportunities on small slates as well than what we'll have on these 12-game slates. But in terms of large slates like this, I very rarely will pay attention to ownership. It just so happens that tonight is one of the kind of the rare instances that we're probably going to get some guys that are near 50% owned, if not higher, with like Lou Williams and whatnot. But in general, so, even though we're playing Lou Williams and he's going to be extremely chalky tonight, the rest of your lineup on a 12-game slate, you should be different enough where you're not going to really have to worry about ownership on single entries. With 150 lineups, though, it's easier to take stances, obviously, on 12-game slates because of the ownership is going to be suppressed. So you don't have to get nearly as aggressive on guys. You might be able to go 30% owned on a guy, and that's going to be an extremely overweight stance. Whereas on 2-3 game slates, every player is going to be 30%. So you're going to have to get much more aggressive with kind of your ownership on smaller slates. Whereas these large slates, it's a little bit easier to kind of ride the middle, just because ownership's not nearly as concentrated. Any sneaky game stacks to target in tournaments? Sneaky. Trying to think of what would qualify as sneaky. We always have a question like this in our expert survey for football, and I try to get kind of sneaky without getting too sneaky with it. Honestly, any game stack outside of the Clippers, Atlanta, and then outside of Denver, Houston, I think is going to be relatively quote-unquote sneaky in terms of high totals or games that we might want to target because of poor defenses. Not necessarily poor defenses, but Boston-Memphis could be an interesting game stack, especially if we get Jalen Brown out and we have a kind of thinned out Boston rotation against Memphis. Memphis is a good team to target. Oh, literally just got announced within the last minute that Jalen Brown is out. So there you go. That works as well. That Boston rotation might be a little bit shortened, and they could go overlooked again tonight just because we have so much value elsewhere. So I guess in terms of sneaky stacks, you could be looking at like that Memphis-Boston game would be kind of a game to stack. See if we have any other questions here. Yeah, I like Boston-Memphis. Yeah, and that Jalen Brown timing worked out pretty well. So make sure to check back with projections for those Boston guys. We'll have those updated. Chris will have those updated within the next probably 10 minutes or so. And he's in chat, posted ownership seconds ago, and just like that, they are worthless. But let's take a quick look, and that will be the last thing we do here on the show. Let's take a quick look at some of the preliminary ownership projections that we have. I'm mostly interested in seeing what he has for Lou Williams, and I'm not completely out of left field when I say that Lou Williams might see ownership over 50%. We have him at 51% on Draftkings, and I would guess that number is going to be higher on FanDuel. So let's see what we have for Lou Williams on FanDuel. Let's see. On FanDuel, Lou Williams at 55%. So, yeah, he's going to be extremely high owned. How many people do you want to stack on a slate like this? Going back to chat. This is similar to kind of what I answered earlier. I think it's going to be completely dependent on the game that you're stacking and kind of the capital you're investing. To put it more kind of in more layman's terms, if it's a game you can stack like the Clippers, or you can get access to a lot of the Clippers offense, where you can get like 3 guys for $15,000, I'm fine stacking 3 guys from the Clippers side and bringing it back with like a Trae Young or a John Collins. Typically, though, on like a 12-game slate like this, I'm not interested on overdoing it. I'd be looking at like 2-1 stacks, 2-2 stacks, that sort of thing. Slate IQ is something we do not have up currently, but that is a tool to check out later in the day. It will be on our NBA drop-down, Slate IQ, it's called again, and that will kind of tell you where the leverage can be found in terms of game stacks. So that's an interesting tool to reference as well. But again, on a slate like this, on a slate that's typically 12 games, you're looking at less people from a single game stack. But yeah, let's take a little bit more glance at some of that ownership Chris just posted. And Gordon Hayward, he already had listed as one of the higher owned players on the slate, and that was pre-Jalen Brown news, I believe. So again, Gordon Hayward is probably going to be extremely high owned now. He's only 5,800. And this could kind of make it is an interesting discussion as well to have. We see a lot of these guys that are popping as kind of mid-tier value on DraftKings tonight. So it's kind of interesting to wonder how owned if it's going to be more of a mid-tier approach to more of a stars and scrubs approach, that's actually another question that you can answer when Slate IQ comes out later today. But that's another interesting thought for tournaments. If you think that there's going to be kind of one path or one commonly used lineup construction where you think, Lou Williams is going to be in most lineups, Gordon Hayward's going to be in most lineups, Montrezl Harrell's going to be in most lineups, Landry Shamet's going to be in most lineups. Like, that's going to be the start of a lot of lineups tonight. Just those four highest owned players. That's going to lead to a more mid-tier lineup construction. So if you want to try to pivot off of, that Lou Williams chalk, if you want to try to pivot off that Hayward, Montrezl Harrell chalk, I think even just going more of a stars and scrubs approach, and we will have some scrubs to use tonight. So going with, a LeBron James on a slate like this, or someone mentioned Karl Anthony Towns, who we currently have listed at 3% owned. And I do think Towns is actually a really good option on tonight's slate for tournaments. So even just going like a Towns and then a low-price dude over, some of these mid-tier guys is another way to get unique lineup construction and something that's going to go completely overlooked tonight. Again, you can kind of see that with these preliminary ownership projections. If we're sorting by by salary, none of these guys are over 10% owned. You have to get down to Trae Young at 9,500 before he's 10% owned. None of these high-priced guys are popping as high-owned options. So simply going, again, kind of high price, low price, so stars and scrubs, as opposed to that mid-tier route, which is going to be extremely used on tonight's slate. It's kind of one way to differentiate your lineups if you're multi-entering tournaments. I think that's mainly all I wanted to talk about. I mentioned earlier that I thought that going with John Collins as opposed to Trae Young in your Los Angeles Clippers and Atlanta Hawks stacks would be unique. I still do think that will be unique construction, but interestingly enough, we do have Collins projected for higher ownership on this slate than Trae Young, basically just because of positional scarcity type of stuff. But still, when creating lineup stacks for that game, I would still think John Collins will be the lower owned approach to those stacks. So I think that's worth pointing out. I think that's pretty much going to do it. We don't have any other questions in chat, so I'm going to end it there. Thank you guys for tuning in. I'll be back again next Wednesday. I believe Blender's back tomorrow. We got Kyle on Friday. If you're enjoying these shows, make sure to go ahead and hit that like button on these shows. It kind of gives us encouragement to continue on with the schedule that we currently have. Feel free to subscribe as well. So that's going to do it for me. Again, thanks for tuning in, and Blender will be back with you guys tomorrow.